Good, non-determinate time of day. I don't know when you're watching this. Hi, I'm Andrew Fantasia. This is Thumb Together, and this is our 8th review marathon. Do you know how these work? Great. Do you not know how these work? Great. I'll tell you either way. It's a review marathon, which means what happens is this. Every 3 months, I try to watch as many movies as I possibly can that I've never seen before. I got a list. It's a big list. The rules are, obviously, yes, I have to have never seen the movie before, and they have to be at least 1 year old. So none of the movies on today's list are from 2022 or 2023. Obviously, they stretch pretty far back, as you are about to see. Now, I'm excited. You better be excited. You're about to be excited because this review marathon, number 8, which happens to be my favorite number, so it kind of worked out special that way, is my biggest review marathon since the first one. The first one was bananas. The first one was 69 movies. It was during the pandemic. I had literally nothing else to do. That number is astronomical, and I ain't reaching for that. However, last time on part 7, we got all the way to 40 movies. That's right. We soared past our sweet spot of 28 to 30, and we got right into the 40s. Well, I'm happy to say Review Marathon 8, we didn't watch 40 movies. We didn't even watch 41 movies. We watched 50. And you think that's impressive? You think that's impressive? Well, guess what? We actually watched 52. That's right, the president of DC Comics is going to be very happy with me because I watched 52 movies I have never seen before. A lot of it probably has to do with the fact that in the month of October, I set myself a goal, and that goal was every day in October, I watched at least one horror or Halloween-y movie. And I stuck to that. Some days I watched 2, some days I even watched 3. Now, they weren't all brand new movies to me, but some of them were. So a lot of this list has October to thank. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get to the meat of it. Here we go. Crack your knuckles, cross your legs, cross your fingers. I don't know, maybe for good luck. I don't know what you're hoping to get out of this, but it's the review marathon. 52 movies begins right now. Let's see how fast we can go. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. Never trust a movie by its title, unless that movie is Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. Or Snakes on a Plane, come to think of it. This rip-roaring action epic is everything you want it to be and more. It delivers on the bonkers title, it has a meaty, well-rounded performance by Benjamin Walker, and despite the fact that it has a decade under its belt, it's probably the best vampire movie we've gotten since. And you can hold that truth to be self-evident. Antlers. The Legend of the Wendigo is one of my favorites, a horrific indigenous tale of a supernatural monster haunting the forests of Canada and the Pacific Northwest. Movies and shows about the Wendigo are scant, so I'll take them where I can find them. Antlers is fine, but I wouldn't call it great or even good. It would have been nice to actually have some indigenous actors front and center, and relegating the whole thing to a mistaken case of child abuse was an odd choice. Basket Case. Horror aficionados the world over swear by Basket Case and have done so for years, so I jumped in ready to be let down by the hype train, but instead found myself pleased and, dare I say, charmed by this motion picture about a boy and his mysterious basket. If this hasn't been spoiled for you yet, I'm not going to be the one to do it. This is a classic, grimy 80s midnight movie, and I am here for it. A Christmas Horror Story. Grossly generic title aside, A Christmas Horror Story is exactly what it sounds like, an anthology of 5 horrific tales set in and around the jolliest of holiday seasons. It's got some decent makeup effects, but the stories aren't anything to write home about, and one of them barely qualifies as being Christmassy at all. The twist ending, though, is worth the price of admission. Consenting adults. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Kevin Spacey plays a weird creepo whose mere presence makes everyone else uncomfortable. This is a really odd thriller with very little going for it, so I would say just check it out if you want to see a young Forrest Whitaker or an old E.G. Marshall doing what they do best. Otherwise, consent to stay away. Creepshow. It was nice to finally cross this Halloween classic off my list, but I've got to say, not many films can live up to the decades of hype like Basket Case, and this one didn't. I had fun watching E.G. Marshall again, this time slowly losing his E.G. marbles in an apartment full of cockroaches, but the rest of this motion picture took any hopes of adding Creepshow to my DVD collection behind the garden shed for a final farewell. The Curse of Frankenstein. I did the original Hammer trifecta, and I finally got to see their interpretation of the timeless Frankenstory itself. The pros? Peter Cushing's Dr. Frankenstein is probably the most unforgivably evil he's ever been. You love to hate this bastard, and you can't wait to see him get his comeuppance. The cons? Christopher Lee's monster is underwhelming. He looks like a bland mummy and doesn't really do or say anything iconic. A great Hammer film, but not the best Frankenstein film. Don't open till Christmas. Set in Soho and dripping with sleaze, this British Christmas horror is way more fun than it has any right to be. It's a murder mystery where there's a killer prowling London streets after hours, killing anyone dressed like Santa, and that's about it. Plagued by production woes, including going through 4 different directors mid-filming, I think it turned out okay, all things considered. Enola Holmes. Brace yourselves, everybody, because we have another Netflix original film that actually feels like a movie theater quality film. Unlike so many of its streaming exclusive contemporaries, there's nothing bland or muted about Enola Holmes. It's just a really fun, well-acted, competently directed story with a decent mystery and an excellent score by Daniel Pemberton. Slowly but surely, Netflix, your film division is crawling its way out of the gutter. The Exorcist. Well, I finally did it. It took me this long because, if we're being brutally honest here, I'm scared of movies like this. And yes, The Exorcist is just as frightening and disturbing as everyone says it is. What's interesting is it doesn't feel tame by today's standards like so many other horrors of its era. It stood the test of time. Having said that, I think the climax is kind of a loud, incoherent mess. Everybody's just screaming and yelling and Reagan's going ballistic. So yes, I might be the first idiot in history to be critical of The Exorcist because I found Pazuzu a little hard on the old eardrums. Fatal Attraction. I feel like Michael Douglas was just constantly having sex with people throughout the 1980s, and in Fatal Attraction, it all finally catches up with him. The consequences of spur-of-the-moment, careless actions are always fun themes around which to build tension, so it's no surprise that Fatal Attraction takes that ball and runs with it in a way that would make John Elway proud. If this film didn't scare the pants back onto every adulterous fellow in 1987, then nothing will. Fear. Don't you hate it when you're just trying to be a successful architect, but then Mark Wahlberg starts dating your teenage daughter and also he's a murderous sociopath? Fear is over the top and silly, and the last 10 minutes are like an R-rated Home Alone where a German Shepherd gets decapitated. Yeah, it's nuts. The Fog. If Stephen King made a baby with H.P. Lovecraft and then that baby was raised by John Carpenter, that baby would be The Fog. This classic seaside ghost story was really cool, but it left me with the unshakable feeling that I would have liked it better if it was longer or if the story had more meat on its bones. Also, Tom Atkins without his trademark mustache is like a Reese peanut butter cup without peanut butter. Probably still delicious, but just plain unsettling. The Hills Have Eyes. Imagine how furious I was when I got to the end of this motion picture, only to find that the hillsides depicted herein possess nary an eye, not of the regular or googly or even hungry variety. But you can break out your 70s horror bingo card because you're getting incredible violence, disturbing subject matter, gratuitous nudity, and an ending so abrupt that the writers of Sopranos will barely have time to blink. Horror of Dracula. I've found my new favorite Dracula movie. Christopher Lee doesn't get much screen time, but when he does, he's terrifying, and Peter Cushing plays a great foil. I love this because it doubles down on the gothic horror of the original Universal film while omitting the ridiculous superpowers and erotic filler of the Coppola version. It's still not perfect. I think it's missing the chilling European atmosphere that should be synonymous with Dracula, but still a bloody good time. See what I did there? I know you did. Hot Water. Back in October, I did a Harold Lloyd double feature, the first of which was Hot Water, from all the way back in 1924, in which Mr. Lloyd is constantly being tormented by his hellish mother-in-law, one of the most consistently funny and well-written silent films I've ever watched. The story beats set up and complement each other like a Rube Goldberg machine. This is physical comedy at its very finest. The Howling. Joe Dante's werewolf extravaganza had a really strong opening and one goddamn fantastic ending, but the middle was a slow, meandering mess that felt like it advanced and accomplished very little in terms of story or character development. I love the ending to pieces, though, and I feel like it sets up a world way more interesting than the one we've just visited. In Bruges. Years and years of being told that this was a masterpiece, culminating in me taking a peek one dark December eve, and lo and behold, In Bruges is absolutely wonderful. I have vivid memories of seeing the poster in movie theaters and trying to figure out how the hell to pronounce Bruges, and what delighted me was that the characters in the movie seemed to be baffled by the choice of location as well. A small, super low budget, and superbly well-acted movie that I highly recommend. The Invisible Man Returns. This is Vincent Price's first time stepping into the unseen shoes of the Invisible Man. Even though he's so young, he hasn't quite mastered his iconic Vincent Price voice yet, so if you didn't know he was in it going in, you'd have no idea it was him until his face finally appears at the very end. The first movie was about the Invisible Man being a psychotic villain. In this one, he's a wrongfully accused man trying to catch the killer who framed him. So I love the role reversal, but I still prefer part one. The Invisible Woman. After 2 horror/thrillers, I was not expecting this to be a farcical romantic comedy. It's a shame because I think the idea of having a female lead in a classic horror would have been really neat. This is still a ton of fun though, and the special effects are as jaw-dropping as ever. Everybody does a fantastic job here, from the leads all the way down to the bit players. Invisible Agent. I didn't know I needed a movie where an invisible man makes a fool out of a bunch of Nazis until Universal gave it to me, and now here we are. Still lighthearted like Invisible Woman, but with a hell of a lot more stakes. This was a cool entry in the franchise and a nice way to spice things up. The Invisible Man's Revenge. They made the Invisible Man a villain again. This time he's an escaped convict wanted for murder, and he's seeking revenge, hence the title, on a wealthy couple who slighted him in the past. This is one of those flicks where everybody's kind of a bastard, so you can root for whoever you want, and as far as I'm concerned, the invisible effects are still the coolest thing you will ever see. Iron Fists and Kung Fu Kicks. A neat little documentary about the history of martial arts movies, beginning with their inception overseas to their eventual adoption in the Western world, with great focus on the Bruceploitation era and all the hilarious and unfortunate films which came as a result. Again, I find myself having been spoiled by the In Search Of documentaries because I feel like this thing needed to be 2 hours longer to really give due credit to the genre, but it put a lot of interesting looking kung fu films on my radar, so I have to thank it for that. The Jewel of the Nile. The sequel to Romancing the Stone is a fun, silly adventure, though the scales absolutely tip more on the silly side of things. I think if I'd seen this when I was 9 years old, it might have been one of my favorite movies, but this goofy adventure isn't quite for me. If you're in the mood for an even more cartoonish Indiana Jones with less stakes, then this might be just the diamond in the rough you're looking for. Krampus. Germanic folklore fascinates me, so this has been a mainstay on my to-watch list for 7 straight years. Now the time has finally come, and Krampus is everything you'd expect from a Michael Dougherty Christmas movie. Dark and twisted as hell, with tongue planted firmly in its frost-bitten cheek. I think this might be the darkest non-R-rated movie I've ever seen, and the practical effects are astounding. Made for each other. This Jimmy Stewart joint that I'd never heard of till now has a neat concept. It follows the life of a man and woman who decide to get married after knowing each other for a single day. What follows is okay, but it meanders through like 5 other movies on its way to the resolution, from being denied a promotion, to living through the Great Depression, to trouble with the in-laws, to help my baby needs medicine. When it picks a lane and stays in it though, you're gonna have a good time. Mean Streets. Come for the fact that this is Martin Scorsese's first historic team-up with Robert De Niro. Stay for the subtle but powerful story. A lot of Marty's earlier works tend to have very meandering plots with a lot of non-sequitur moments, and that takes some getting used to. But if you take away the fat and just look at the bare-bones story being told here, Mean Streets, which I learned to my horror is semi-autobiographical, delivers a beautiful message about just how toxic the world of the mob can be. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This political classic is funnier, sweeter, and more heartwarming than I could have expected. However, 1930s films are not known for their denouements, and Mr. Smith, a picture with a lot of stakes involved, ends as abruptly as the titular character's filibuster. Falling actions are important, kids, but aside from that, this is Golden Age Hollywood cinema in top form. The Mummy. Like the Universal picture that came before it, Hammer's dip into the world of ancient Egyptian curses shuffles along at a pace slower than the monster whose name is in the title. However, I will give this the honor of being my favorite visual mummy from any mummy movie, because he actually looks like, you know, a mummy. I don't understand how Universal got the look wrong 3 separate times. It's not the smorgasbord of fun that is Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz hopping through Egypt, but it has its charms. The New York Ripper. Lucio Fulci told a bananas murder mystery on the streets of 1980s New York? Yes please. You'll forget it as soon as it's over, but while you're knee-deep in the New York Ripper, you're in for a sleazy, blood-soaked treat. Nosferatu. I've caught random chunks of this on TV over the years, but this was my first time sitting through the whole thing, with remastered music and no commercials. I dig it. It can be a bit disjointed and dry at times, but damn if Count Orlok isn't the coolest looking vampire ever put to film. I cannot wait for Robert Eggers to remake this. I'd buy a ticket right now if I could. The One. I have memories of being in the 9th grade and seeing absolutely bonkers TV spots for this Jet Li epic. Remember that really awkward phase we went through in the early 2000s when we thought fight scenes set to Godsmack or Disturbed were like the coolest things ever? Unfortunately, that phase existed. Double unfortunately, The One exists at its zenith. I feel like if I were to show this to someone born post-2008, I would have to apologize to them in advance. Cool story though. 1 Hour Photo. When I first heard about this, I remember thinking it sounded fake. Robin Williams playing a deranged stalker in an R-rated thriller? That can't be right. But it happened, and it's indisputable proof that, apart from being unbelievably kind, Mr. Williams was one hell of a versatile, talented soul. 1 Hour Photo tells a disturbing, subtle story that doesn't need to resort to any of the old thriller cliches. Pacific Heights. Proof that Michael Keaton can play a really scary and vastly hateable villain. Considering Pacific Heights is asking us to root for a couple of yuppies who buy an expensive home and then try to recoup their investment by renting it out to tenants, it clearly has not aged well. To the shock of no one, I didn't care for the heroes whose problems, despite Keaton's every villainous attempt, seemed laughably small in the grand scheme of things. I felt way sorrier for Mako and his wife. Can we just get a movie about them? Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge. This is the same location where they filmed Fast Times and Chopping Mall. That's it. That's all you need to know. Screen all three of them together for the ultimate Sherman Oaks Galleria marathon. Maybe start with this one though, because Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge is the weakest by far. The title is such a spoiler that if these people had adapted Dan Brown novels, the Da Vinci Code would have been called Jesus Had Kids. Raising Cain. Brian De Palma is... well, he's Brian De Palma, take it or leave it. And Raising Cain might be one of the most self-congratulatory films he's ever made. There's really nobody to root for here, and the chronologically skewed plot isn't helped by the fact that this movie contains dreams within dreams within dreams. It had some cool moments, but at the end of the day, I give it a thanks but no thanks out of 10. Raya and the Last Dragon. This does not have the iconic Disney staying power of an Encanto or a Frozen, but Raya is still grossly underrated. The world building and storytelling on display here friggin' slaps. I think if they'd spent less time on the middling Gen Z humor and more time on the emotional stakes, this could have ended up being a perfect movie. Definitely worth a watch. Revenge. A French film with a very simple premise. 3 jackasses do some terrible things to this nice lady, so she gets revenge. If seeing bodies get mutilated makes you squeamish, maybe skip this one, but I dig it. Stylistically shot with a third act that contains almost no dialogue, Revenge is a blood-soaked dish best served at full volume on a big screen. Safety not guaranteed. There's a feeling I inevitably get whenever I watch low-budget, quasi-independent sci-fi or fantasy movies, and that feeling is, God, this is really good, somebody better give this director an actual budget and free rein to make more cool original stuff like this. And then that happens, but it happens with a big franchise legacy sequel, and the director isn't given any room to flex their creative muscles, so just like Monsters and Kin and District 9 before it, Safety Not Guaranteed impressed me and then depressed me. The Siege. I wouldn't say I enjoyed The Siege, but I did find it interesting because of the plot. It's about radicalized Islamic terrorists bombing buildings in NYC, so America retaliates by declaring martial law, whereupon they very wrongly and very racistly round up every Arab man of a certain age living in New York and interrogate them in concentration camps. What staggers me is that this came out in 1998, less than 3 years before 9/11 would turn almost the entire plot into reality, particularly America's ugly, fear-fueled treatment of innocent Muslims that continues to this day. Difficult to watch at times and by no means enjoyable, The Siege is an eerily prescient movie that I'm sure conspiracy theorists have latched onto like pandas onto bamboo. Sleeping with the Enemy. Julia Roberts' husband has a mustache and he's also abusive and evil, so she fakes her own death and leaves him in the dust. But unless you're Tom Atkins in The Fog, you can't keep a good mustache down, and Mr. Evil Husband slowly starts to realize that Julia might not be as dead as he thinks. Thrills, chills, unexpected romance, an overuse of romantic oldies, and burnt roasts ensue. Sliver. If you live in the same building as a Baldwin brother and he keeps staring at you without blinking, your first instinct should probably be to run. Fast. Sharon Stone does not have that instinct, and the result is we have to sit through her making one baffling choice after another, trusting a man who looks and behaves like a literal shark that smells blood in the water. The ending of Sliver was changed very late in production, so the mystery that the whole plot hinges on is senseless. Add this to the list of unintentional comedies. Speedy. One of 2 Harold Lloyd flicks I saw back in October. I prefer Hot Water. Speedy is one of Lloyd's later films and relies less on clever writing and more on special effects, stunts, and spectacle. It's still immensely entertaining. I just didn't laugh my ass off here the way I did with Hot Water. Fun fact, there's a scene at Coney Island where Lloyd gives himself the middle finger in a carnival mirror. I thought I saw it wrong, but it actually happens, which might make this the first time anyone ever made that gesture in a motion picture. Titan AE. Beautiful animation and a fun, original sci-fi story get tossed into a pot with some of the most poorly aged late 90s rock songs ever composed by human hands. Not only do we need to bring back hand-drawn animation, we need to bring back animated movies for adults. I don't know what happened to us as a society, but there have been absolutely 0 of these for the past 20 years, and that needs to change. Trick or Treats. Come for the title in the 80s Halloween setting, but stay for the kid. This kid is hilarious. He's so evil that the vengeful, murderous slasher feels underplayed and unimportant. You just keep thinking, what's he gonna do next? There are Baystel Halloween decorations in this too. That's all you need to know. Go watch it. Tough Turf. What happens when you've got Ultron and Iron Man in your movie, but it's 1985, so you don't have the budget for an Avengers-level story? You make Tough Turf, an absolutely cuckoo bananas time capsule with the most gang warfare-adjacent dance numbers since West Side Story. Any 80s fan owes it to themselves to see this. Also, it has an Easter egg that has to be seen to be believed. Check it out. So you've got Robert Downey Jr. and James Spader, and look what that graffiti says in the background. That coincidence is so cosmic that it pretty much confirms Silver Surfer in Phase 5. VHS. I've spent the last few years kind of wrinkling my nose at the found footage genre, but I'm glad I gave VHS a chance because I dig what they're trying to do here. The framing device is simple but effective, and the stories were creative and fun. They embraced their theme and gave us some great spooky stories here to boot. VHS 2. A step down from the original, but not too shabby. The Gareth Evans segment was the highlight for me. Creepy religious cults just never fail at delivering the scares, no matter what kind of set dressing they slap over them. The other stories were kind of basic and crude and didn't really offer much substance. I will probably not be rewinding this. That's a VHS joke, kids. Ask your grandparents to explain it to you later. VHS Viral. The framing device in this third VHS outing is one of the most incomprehensible things I've ever seen, but the filmmakers play it up like it's goddamn Hemingway, and I couldn't help but laugh. The parallel monster segment was pretty cool, and the magician thing had a lot of potential, but those skateboarding dweebs in segment 3 made me want to take my eardrums out with a melon baller. VHS 94. Definitely the best entry since part 1. A return to form with a lot more lucidity, thank God, and way more creative stories. The framing device is still lacking in this, but it makes up for it with 4 great stories, each with that distinctive classic horror presence that is kind of hard to quantify, but you'll know it when you feel it. Victor Frankenstein. They really ought to have called this flick Igor, since he's the main character and pretty much everything happens from his point of view. Regardless, Mary Shelley's story is a fascinating one, and I love seeing how it can be interpreted through so many different lenses. This lens was a cool one. Frankenstein was delightfully batty, and this is the best a monster has looked since Boris Karloff. The Void. A bunch of Canadians tried to make a love letter to Lovecraft with this low-budget flick, and I'm going to be real with you, I did not care for it. Too much of the runtime was dedicated to characters just hallucinating, which accomplishes absolutely nothing except making an already incoherent plot even more incoherent. The outfits the cultists wear are pretty rad, but that's about it. And The Void makes 52. That's it. We made it to the end. Now that the year is over, it's time to look back and see how many new movies my review marathoning has introduced me to. Last year, I got around to watching altogether 112 movies, thanks to the review marathons, and I promised myself I would top that number this year. Did I do it? Did I ever? Instead of 112, folks, the year 2022's review marathons gave me 156 all new movies to watch. That is pretty darn great. I'm so excited to have a review marathon this big, and I probably have to warn you all ahead of time that when we do this again in April, it's probably not going to be 52 movies long, because January alone, I have so many videos coming down the pipeline. I have all of the Fanny Awards, which is 11 videos. You know how involved those are. Plus, there's a lot of heavy stuff going on at work that happens in January where I'm editing student videos constantly, so that's just a thing that's going to happen. I'm not going to be watching a whole lot of movies in January. February and March, actually March, I'm going to be spending most of my time at the movie theater. Have you seen March's release schedule this year for the year of our Lord 2023, Anno Domini? Holy crap! So I will do my best. Will I reach 52? The 8 ball says unlikely, but what it is, and I can guarantee you, we will come back here with at least 25. I think I can promise at least 25 new movies for Review Marathon 9. Until that happens, though, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to pick up a copy of my novel Side Scroller on Amazon.com right now. You can even get an ebook if that's the way you want to live your life. And until next time, adios.